Welcome to the League of Nerds comic book segment number 47. I'm John Cooney here to talk to you about comics released the 26th of December 2012 in a special holiday edition of the comic book segment. Now normally I give you an in-depth look at my first five, meaning the first 5 books that I intend to read for the week, and then a look at the remaining books in my top 10, along with the best of the rest of the books released, as well as some interesting trade paperbacks. But with Christmas this week, so few books were released that I only really have a top 5. So my first 5 are my only 5 this week, starting with Amazing Spider-Man number 700. Okay, first of all, this is the most poorly kept secret in comics, so spoilers are everywhere. But I'll try to keep this preview spoiler-free, not only for the significant events in 700, but also for the twist back in number 698, which, if you haven't read that yet, I would still strongly recommend it. In fact, it's one of the nominees for our Nerdy Awards in the Best Single Issue category. Anyway, back to issue 700. Here's what happened. Because of the holiday shipping schedule this week, Marvel shipped that book last week and expected retailers to sit on it for a week and wait for its December 26th release date. So it's no surprise that it's been leaked all over the internet. However, the reaction to it has been overwhelmingly negative, something I suspect writer Dan Slott was anticipating when he said, quote, "I'm going into hiding after issue 700 comes out. I'm not looking at message boards. I'm not poking my head up out of the hole because what happens in issue 700 is big," close quote. But I don't think he was expecting this level of response, to the point that it's been reported that he's receiving actual death threats for what happens in issue number 700, reaching the level that he's been forced to call the authorities. But then again, maybe he was, because in another interview he said, quote, "I've said over and over again that after 700 comes out, I'm going into a bunker. I'm doing a signing for Midtown Comics for 700, but they've promised me bodyguards and a Pope mobile," close quote. Now, without specifically telling you what the outcry is for, and still safeguarding the plot twist from Amazing Spider-Man number 698, there's really not much that I can say about this issue. I'll tell you that my production schedule usually has me doing my research on Monday, and then recording and editing on Tuesday, so I'm actually speaking these words to you on Christmas Day. So I'll take this moment to say that I hope that everyone has had an enjoyable and Merry Christmas. But I'll also say this, although my timetable usually prevents me from reading the books beforehand in order to get this recording out on the Wednesday that the issues are actually released, because of the nature of the spoilers online, I did take the opportunity to read the issue ahead of its release date in order to evaluate the reactions in the context of the story. And I must say I can see the reason for the concern. Do I think it warrants death threats? Certainly not. And do I realize, as with most significant disruptions in comics continuity, it'll hopefully be temporary and eventually be set straight? That surely seems likely. But in the meantime, we've reached the conclusion of Amazing Spider-Man in this oversized, and in my opinion overpriced at $7.99, ultimate issue. At number 2 this week, we've got Avenging Spider-Man number 15.1. Now, Avenging Spider-Man 15.1 is the epilogue to the Amazing Spider-Man number 700, and it's also the prologue to Superior Spider-Man number 1, setting up the new status quo and character motivations for that title. It's a crucial part of the Spider-Man storyline, and one that got horribly under-ordered because no one realized just what it was going to entail. Marvel solicited the book as, quote, "coinciding with the end of Amazing Spider-Man, a look back at the greatest conflict in comics history, Spider-Man versus Dr. Octopus," close quote. Now that implied that this was a flashback issue recapping Spidey versus Doc Ock battles throughout the ages, and retailers will order less issues of a flashback issue than they would of an event comic, and in this case it turns out that this book is a critical part of the transition, and it's already been sent for a second printing. Now from DC this week we've only got a few books, one of them being Before Watchmen Nite number 4. Now this is the final book for the series, and J. Michael Straczynski said that it was important for Nite and Rorschach to get together in Before Watchmen Nite number 4 and show how Nite Owl develops and starts his career as a costume crime fighter. He adds that we'll also see Rorschach go to some very dark places in the book, and both he and Nite Owl are products of their childhood, and he explores why they would put their lives on the lines for roles like this. Now, similar to Marvel, DC has 2 other books this week that cross over, in Aquaman number 15 and Justice League number 15 in the Throne of Atlantis storyline. Series writer Jeff Johns says that the first year of Justice League was about world building, and the first year of Aquaman was still introducing a different spin on Aquaman, and new concepts like the Trench and the others. Both books kind of culminate here in the second year. This was the perfect time to kick off our big Aquaman-centric Justice League story. But Superman and Wonder Woman have big roles in the story too. Cyborg has a massive role in Throne of Atlantis, and everyone will have a big role. Just because Arthur is the focus doesn't mean everyone won't play a role. It's just that he gets a little more of the spotlight. Johns continues, and then we move forward in Justice League. You'll see the spotlight rotate a bit in the second year. We're going to tell the biggest possible stories we can, focused on our most important characters, and that makes these stories really, really personal, but very, very big. Hopefully the perfect balance of what Justice League as a book should be. With Aquaman, it's been all about setting Aquaman up as a true A-lister. Getting him to the point where Aquaman's crossing over with the Justice League just makes sense organically. It makes sense to have him the focus of the story that involves the entire Justice League and a lot of other heroes too as we move throughout this story. But the fact that we're here and Aquaman is now elevated to this status, for me, it really is the end of the first year for us getting the Justice League back on track and Aquaman to a position of real power. Discussing the story and specifically the antagonist, Arthur's half-brother Orm, John says, quote, I absolutely love villains, as you know, and so looking at Ocean Master and taking a step back and saying, okay, what kind of person is this? He's someone who actually cares very much for his brother. He doesn't understand his brother at all, and he cares for him because he's his brother. He has violent tendencies just like all Atlanteans do, which we've seen with Arthur, and he has a perspective on the surface world that's very different from Arthur's, but shared with the Atlanteans. And at the end of the day, like other Atlanteans, he doesn't want to get involved in the surface world. They're a culture whose world was sunk, and most of the civilization died. There were very few that were able to survive and adapt to being underwater and create this underwater society. And over the years, the centuries, they built this wonderful society. But it's very insulated and very fearful of the outside world because of what's happened. It's just in their DNA. So what sparks this war, and why it happens, and ultimately where it goes, is a big mystery that's within the storyline. Orm's relationship with Arthur is very different from what Orm's relationship with the Justice League will be, but Orm's relationship with Arthur is extremely complicated. This is a world of grays. Just like all modern-day wars, by the way. Modern-day wars are who attacked first, and let's keep going. And now it's retribution, or it's defense. Perspectives really get blurred. You can see it right now with what's going on right now. In Atlantis, it's not like boom, and they come out of the water and attack. It's very complicated, and war's nothing that anyone wants. But they're pushed to it, and we'll see why, and we'll learn what happened. Close quote. Alright, so that's it for me this week. My first 5 are really the only 5 books out this week that I intend to read, but that's okay because I'm still catching up on the ton of books that came out last week. So there's still plenty to read, so be sure to check with your local comic book shop and find out what's available. Plus, I've also really been enjoying reading back issues of The Walking Dead, trying to keep a little ahead of my wife as she reads them for the first time. But if you want to see what I'm reading as I read it, check in with me at he'sgotissues.com, my Facebook blog, and be sure to like the page while you're there. You can also visit theleagueofnerds.com where David, Brandon, and I discuss all things nerdy, including our nominees for the forthcoming Nerdies Awards, so be sure to check with us there and cast your votes. And a reminder that both He's Got Issues and the League of Nerds are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network, along with several other great comics podcasters. So until next week, I'm John Cooney wishing you a Happy New Year and reminding you, I've got issues.